Well, hello, everyone. We're going to do the now familiar allow everyone to flow into the Zoom room. We'll take a minute or so and let everybody do that. In the meantime, I'm going to pop a poll up on the screen. Can give us a sense of who's here, especially with a topic like course selection for tonight. We definitely want to get a sense of who's joining us this evening, parents, students, ages of folks. It's definitely a pretty important key. We'll start to get into the content here in about another 30 seconds, maybe. I always feel like this is the time when I should start singing the Jeopardy theme song as folks are rolling in. Maybe we should create our own theme song, friends. That would be fun. That would be fun. Oh, and that pretty good guess here. Yep, definitely a lot of folks on the younger side here. All right. All right. Well, we definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time tonight. So we'll go ahead and jump in. And first, let me say welcome. My name is Meredith Graham. I'm part of the Collegewise counseling team here. And we are very excited to have you join us tonight for our webinar on high school course selection. We have a lot of content to get through and a very full house tonight. So before we jump in, I want to tell you a little bit about Collegewise for those of you who aren't as familiar with us. Collegewise started in 1999 with one counselor in Irvine, California, and 23 years later, we are the largest college counseling company in the US. We're focused on being a trusted source for high quality information for students and families, and on increasing the joy and decreasing the stress of the journey to college. We're all about reminding families that great education happens a lot of places and that what students do in college matters far more than where they go to college. I'm going to let my fellow presenters introduce themselves here in a few minutes. But one thing that the four of us have in common is that we all spent time as academic advisors at universities before becoming college counselors, which means that all of us have a particular expertise in helping students anytime between grade 9 and college graduation to sort of look through all of the different course options that they have and help plan the courses to best fit them and to take advantage of every possible opportunity that they can at their schools. Some quick housekeeping notes before we really get rolling. Because we have such a large group here tonight, we've turned the chat off. However, we will be sharing links and resources out with you in the chat box, including presenter bios and some other fun stuff along the way. You will be able to post questions in the Q&A, and a few other counselors and I will be in the Q&A and in the chat box answering questions and pushing things out to you tonight. We definitely encourage you to keep your questions in big picture as possible. We're really not going to be able to answer a lot of very specific, nuanced individual questions tonight. And chances are good we're not going to be able to get to every individual or every question at all tonight. The good thing is that the session is being recorded and you will get a copy of it in your email in the next couple of days. And with that, I'm going to let my co-presenters take it away. Hanifa, go for it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Hanifa Abdul-Sabor. I'm an online counselor here at Collegewise, originally from upstate New York. For my own college experience, I attended Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, and then I attended graduate school at Columbia University in New York. My academic background is actually in cultural anthropology. I initially wanted to be a professor, but I pivoted towards advising and mentoring and coaching college students and then eventually college-bound students. So I've also been an academic advisor at the George Washington University in DC, experienced many different kinds of college environments. And I definitely love the experience of helping students to prepare on this side in order to be successful on the other side as well.
Thanks, Hanifa. I'm Anita Gajla. I'm in the Chicagoland area in the great Midwest, although I also grew up in New York. For undergraduate, I went to Williams College in Massachusetts. I was a major in psychology. Got my graduate degree from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Go Michigan. And I have worked at Macalester College in St. Paul, Elmhurst University here in the Chicago area, and the University of Chicago. So I started off mostly on the student affairs side of the house, mostly doing student activities, but switched over to the academic affairs side, did a lot with service learning and academic advising in particular. So What I love about my work at Collegewise is that I'm not just thinking about admissions, but also the longer term picture of success. And when I talk to students, for me, it is really thinking about all those building blocks of those courses and the skills that students learn along the way so they can be successful both in high school and beyond. And that's part of what I love. So you'll hear more from me in a bit, but first I'm going to turn over to Allie to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Allie Springer. I'm a college counselor with Collegewise. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and have been here for most of my adulthood. Started off with going to college at Colorado College, where I studied, and then I transitioned into K-12 schools and education for a few years before heading to University of Denver for my graduate coursework, getting a master's in higher education and student development, which is where I served as an academic advisor. Then I actually went back to my alma mater, went to Colorado College and worked in the admissions office there for about 8 admission seasons as an associate director of admissions, recruiting students all over the country, as well as reading applications. Super excited to talk with you all about course selection tonight. It's one of my favorite topics to chat about with students. And I love that I kind of have that college lens as well, having worked as an academic advisor during graduate school as well. Really excited to spend time with you all tonight. So I will turn it back over to our first presenter.
Hanifa, sorry, your mute button didn't come off.
Sorry, everyone. So thank you all again for joining us today for this webinar. We know that course selection can be sometimes a stressful process, one that can be confusing, and it's hard to know which courses that you're going to choose in order to set yourself up for the success that you want and need. So our goal here today is to empower you to make more informed decisions and more confident decisions that will not only set you up for success in your high school experience, but that will also set you up for success in the college admissions process and also in college itself. And so to that end, we will cover how course selection affects college admissions. We'll also discuss with you navigating some core course requirements in your high school course selection, how you weigh your options, what is that decision-making process like? And also we'll share with you some of our case studies from our work with students to help kind of put these things together and help you see what these guidelines look like in action. And then we'll have some next steps and tips for you to help you to take this information and apply it within your individual context. Because as Meredith mentioned, we're not able to answer your very specific questions in this space, but hopefully all of you can walk away with something that will help you to better navigate your own decisions. So to start off, let's talk about what you're preparing for when you're choosing your high school courses. When students transition to the college space, and this is something we've all seen as academic advisors in the college space, there's many changes that they face. And some of the choices that you make in high school can help prepare you to make those decisions and navigate those transitions once you get to the college space. So these are things that we've seen that have been challenges that students have taken on when they're first coming to college. This can include a more flexible curriculum and more course options. So the whole process of making decisions about your academic experience becomes magnified in the college space. And so this is a great time to start practicing those skills. Course rigor becomes something that is different than your high school experience. And this is true, I find, for even the best students, the straight A students, students who can do this in their sleep. Something in college will challenge you, right? So finding out what happens when you challenge yourself academically and how do you grow when you face those kinds of circumstances. Students will have the opportunity to guide their own academic focus and being able to choose a major. And sometimes even in the assignments themselves, they may say to you, write an 8-page paper, but they may not tell you what exactly to make that paper about, right? And so you're having to choose repeatedly in the college space what you want to focus on, what really gets your interest, what will help you to apply these concepts that you're that you're learning about. Also within the college space, you're expected to demonstrate more independence and self-initiative. There's usually a ton of resources that help you to make the most out of your college experience and to really succeed both there and afterwards. However, it's expected that you will take initiative in going to those resources and actually accessing them and using them. High school is a great place to start doing that, not waiting for someone else to walk you through every step. And so kind of taking control of your academic experience. And then also just in college, there's a lot of environmental factors. For most high school students, we go to school, we do our classes, and then we leave, and the rest of our life is outside of school, right? Whether it's our social life with our friends, if we go to church, is where we go to church, all those things, right? And if you have a traditional college experience, a lot of times you're doing your entire life within that space. And it's easy for these your academic interests and experiences to blend with the rest of your experience. So thinking about your own academics in a bigger way can help you to make some smart choices when it comes to your high school courses. So how do admissions officers look at your course selection and try to think about whether you're ready to make that transition into their campus community? When admissions officers are looking at your applications and they're reviewing your academics, usually there's a process that we call holistic admissions or holistic review. And what this entails is that not only will they be looking at your grades and at your scores, but they'll also be looking at many other aspects of who you are in order to try to understand you as a person, right? Because ultimately the grade that you got in this one course you took here, or in these courses you took in your high school space, doesn't necessarily translate into what you're going to do in these new circumstances. So they're trying to understand from your choices some things about the kind of college student that you will be. How will you participate in the college space and in your classroom and both outside of the classroom, and how you will contribute to the larger campus community that you'll be invited into. So when they're looking at your academic choices, they're looking to see, yes, that you're academically prepared and have the foundations to grow in your academic courses, but also that you're willing to challenge yourself and take intellectual risk, right? And that you're curious and willing to pursue your interests, because no one is going to choose your major for you. And you have so many options in college, many that you won't have in high school. The best way to take advantage of it is to be openly curious and seeking those out. And you're looking to see too that you're resilient. What do you do when you inevitably face something you've never seen before, or have a challenge that you didn't anticipate? And how do you tackle those kinds of things and grow? So how does an admissions officer derive all that information from your transcript, right? So one thing to know is that when you are applying and when you're completing applications, really a lot of it is storytelling. It's a narrative that you're sharing with the admissions office about you and who you are as a person. And your transcript is one part of that story, right? So when admissions officers look at your transcript, they're not only going to look at your grades and say, check, check, what GPA do they have? Okay, done. But they're going to do a bit of a deep dive to understand first the context of your school. So there's information that your school provides in which they understand what kind of courses your school offers, what kind of requirements you're fulfilling, what is the pattern in the way students typically emerge from your school. And so that way, when they review your application, they can review you within the context of your school's options. And then they look at the choices that you made within the options that you had. They're looking to see that you have the basic requirements that they need in order to admit students to their school. They're looking to see that you took opportunities to take on more rigor, to challenge yourself, right? So if your school had a standard level English course, and also they offer AP or IB or dual enrollment. These are all different ways to show that you're willing to take on a challenge you didn't have to take in order to expand your learning. They'll also look at how your course choices match the story that you're telling, right? So if you are a student who's interested in perhaps becoming an engineer, your math and science courses, the choices that you make in those courses suddenly become more significant. They're looking to see that you're stronger in those areas. If you're telling them that you're interested in being an English major, what do those English grades look like? And then also they're looking at your elective choices. How did you use the opportunity to explore an interest or use the opportunity to learn more about the thing that you're interested in? If you wanted to be a business major, did you take economics or any other opportunities that were possibly related, psychology perhaps? And then also they're looking for trends in your performance because these tell the stories of your consistency, of your commitment, and also they can tell a story of resilience. Say you came in and had a challenging freshman year, this often happens both in high school and in college, and then your grades steadily grow in a certain subject area. That can be a testament to the work that you put into to grow when you face a challenge. And so when admissions officers read your transcript, you're viewing all of these different factors in your choices in order to get a better understanding of who you are as a person and how you're likely to behave when you face the context of your college academics. So when you're thinking about how to decide about your specific courses, these are the main factors that you'll want to consider. Your state requirements, every state has certain requirements for students to graduate from high school. Typically, those are already wrapped up in your school's requirements. They have to be in order for your schools to be accredited. And so that you start from the fundamentals of what's required of you. But then what you need to do is consider your needs, and you can consider this from two perspectives. One is you want to consider your future needs and where you're trying to go, what you're trying to learn, and what courses will help you to get there. What do you want to be prepared for when you graduate from high school? But also consider your present needs. What about the time commitments that your course choices will require of you? How will the balance of the courses that you're choosing? Are you taking all of your most rigorous courses at once? Are you able to handle that? Because we also want you to be set up for success, but success isn't possible without you being healthy too, right? So thinking about your needs, both in the moment, but also in terms of where you would like to go. And along those lines, if you have any colleges that you're interested in, you want to look up the college requirements and factor those into your decisions. And so with this, I'm going to hand it over to Anita, who will take you a bit further into thinking about how to address those requirements.
Thanks, Nifa. That's a great overview, and I love thinking about all the different pieces that come together. I will say that in addition to sort of the bigger context that Hanifa was speaking to in terms of your school, in terms of colleges that you're looking at, there's also an individual context. So what I mean by this is sometimes a student will say to me, well, should I take this class or that class? And I'm like, wait, let's go back and look at your whole, kind of 4-year plan is what I've got up. And I really want to know, like, how do things fit together? I want to make sure that each year is not too challenging. I want to make sure the requirements are met. I want to make sure that the sequencing makes sense, excuse me. So this whole 4-year plan, in case you don't have one, most school counselors use one, but in case you don't have one, I think they're going to drop one in the chat box that you can copy and use as your own. And I want to note a few things about this 4-year plan. The first is we've included 9th through 12th grade. I purposely did not put 8th grade or summer courses on here. 8th grade and summer courses, that's an individual decision about how you do things. It is not necessarily considered the norm. And there's some other factors that have to, maybe come into play there. And that's much more an individual conversation than a group conversation. So I tried to keep this a little bit on the simpler side. The other thing that you'll notice is on the bottom of this 4-year plan, we've got a link to high school course guide. So your high school probably has something in writing, whether it's on the web or maybe a packet they've got at school or something else that teachers and administrators have put together to show you kind of like what they're expecting you to take and when. There might be some notes about, maybe you need to take this before you take that class, just any kind of restrictions, guidelines, anything that you can think about. So, some courses might be that you need to have a teacher rec to take that class. Whatever it is usually mapped out pretty well in that high school course guide. So I'd encourage you to look at that and take a good look at it, keep it handy, and notice if things are new from year to year, because that also happens. The other thing that I've noted on here is your school profile link. Most high schools out there in the US have a school profile, and this is what admissions officers look at to get some high level view of what your high school is. So they might say like, oh, this high school doesn't have any AP classes. So I know that the students applying from this high school don't have AP classes. Okay, great. And they're really putting you as an individual in this larger context, which is what Hanifa was talking about earlier. So those are two important links that certainly our Collegewise counselors look for, and that's something that you want to make sure you've got kind of handy as you're thinking about high school course selection. Other thing that I want to note on here is that you've seen some of these subject areas in bold. We consider the 5 core areas to be math, science, English, social science, and world language, sometimes also called foreign language or language other than English is what the UC system refers to it as, but world language, something other than English. Those are the 5 core areas that colleges are particularly concerned about. Those are usually where most of the requirements come from. Those are pretty important to note. Number of colleges will recompute GPAs, and they will include mostly academic classes in those 5 core areas. Again, that's why I haven't included 8th grade or summer courses, because those can change around depending on how a college wants to count them. Fine arts is required by some places, and I'll talk more about that in particular, and it can be considered a core requirement for some schools, but maybe not others, so that's why it's highlighted. The other pieces, most colleges, honestly, they're not really looking at PE or health grade. They might be looking at electives depending on what they are, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then also some schools have other requirements. So that's something, you know, you want to watch out for. My son's in 9th grade. He has what we call a career technical education requirement, which is pretty common in Illinois from what I gather. And it's another course that he has to take that is a little more career based. And so it's a high school requirement, but it's not necessarily a college requirement. So again, think about all of these things in conjunction as you're plotting things out and deciding not just 1 year, but maybe multiple years. I'm going to go into a little bit more nitty gritty about some of these things, some of these areas. So in particular, math is, you know, kind of a core. It is a core, excuse me. And students have been taking math since they were probably in preschool, basically. High school requirements across the country, most of them say that they want to see 3 years of math from what I gather. And it is some combination of geometry, algebra, trigonometry. Sometimes they're listed that way. Sometimes they might be listed as integrated math 1, 2, 3. Maybe it's algebra 1, geometry 2, something like that. But basically, those are 3 foundational years that we really want to see. Usually that's the math that shows up on both the SAT and ACT. So once a student has finished those 3 core areas, they're usually ready to take the math part of those standardized tests. Now, what's really important about math is the sequencing. You really need to take those first 3 classes, and then it enables you to take some additional classes. Some students start in 7th or 8th grade, some students start in 9th grade, and when you look at that 4-year plan, if you can map it out, you can decide where you might end up. Pre-calculus is, you know, a fairly typical class that people take. And then there's the biggest question that we get all the time, which is calc or stats. Calc or stats, which one should I take and when? I will say that students who are doing math and science majors, so, you know, in particular, maybe engineers, and in medicine, excuse me, they're going to want to see that calc. A lot of business majors, a lot of the top end business schools would like to see the higher rigor in math. And so that calc might be the way that you can show them some higher rigor. The highly selective schools love to see the calc. It's considered one of the more strenuous requirements and rigor out there. And I will say that the one thing that we see a lot at Collegewise is students who have jumped ahead so far that junior year they finished AP Calc BC. And then senior year they say, well, the only thing I've got left to take is stats. But one of the things that we like to remind students is if you're going to do a math science path, then freshman year of college, you might be required to do some more calc, maybe Calc 3, or maybe you're going to higher level math. So that year gap of not having calc can make freshman year harder unless you have a way to kind of refresh your memory about some of the calc. Stats is a great class, and it might be the right option for you if you're going to say, you know what, no, I'm not going to do a math or science-based major. But this is a really individual question. There's a lot of debate in the field about calc or stats, so watch out for that one. I will also say there's a lot of questions around, honors or AP. These are individual questions that you should really talk to your teachers about more than anything else and see what they suggest for you, knowing your strengths and skills. Next, we move on to science. I will say the holy triumvirate for science is biology, chemistry, physics. Most high schools that I've seen, the students I've worked with, bio is 9th grade because it doesn't require a lot of math, chemistry 10th grade, 11th grade physics, or some variation on that. There are some schools that do 9th grade physics first. A lot of Collegewise counselors do see students not take physics, and we're still trying to figure out what that's about. Where's that message coming from? But a lot of colleges really do like to see that chem and physics in high school, and these are important base courses that will get built on in college, and especially if you're a math or science major. A lot of students will double up. There's a lot of great options in terms of AP Environmental Science, AP Biochem Physics, of course. There might be anatomy, physiology, genetics. These are all great courses, but please make sure that you get some of those core areas, that biochem, physics in particular. And you can do it a number of different ways. Again, when you map it out, you'll see what works best for you. In particular, we see a lot of people take AP Bio or AP Chem in 11th grade and wait on physics. That's an individual decision. Again, think about, I've seen a lot of students double up because they know they want to do a science major, which is great, and that's an individual choice. But just think about where you're at and what it is that you're, where you're trying to go long term as you're making some of those decisions. English, I will say English feels fairly standard for the most part. It's most high schools and colleges require 4 years of English, English 9, 10, 11, 12. Sometimes you have some APs that are offered. Some schools offer some different kinds of electives that can count towards that standard English requirement. So again, talk to your school about what's offered and what makes the most sense for you. I will say the one question I get is sometimes I'll have a student who says, well, I'm really a math and science major. Why do I need all this English? Like, is it really beneficial for me to take AP language or literature? And the issue is really that it's about communication. No matter what you do in life, you need to have great communication skills, whether they're verbal or written or whatnot. And this is kind of a hallmark value in our society. And that's why the requirement is there as it is. So going along, social science. Social sciences are really very broad. We in the US, I think, tend to harp on history in particular. And I see most students taking some sort of class in US history, some sort of Euro or world history, and then government seems to be a fairly typical requirement across the US. There are some schools, I know New Mexico says something specific about a history of New Mexico class. Ohio has, I think, a personal finance class. So there's these little requirements that might be embedded in your, state requirements or your high school requirements that you should watch out for. Most people don't have a lot of social science requirements for whatever reason. And I think sometimes people lose out because, again, social science is a wide field. There's psychology, there's economics, there's sociology, anthropology, lots of great topics out there that I think a lot of students don't get exposed to early on. So it might be something that you think about and how you want to explore those areas. And in particular, if you want to take them on in college, you might want to have a good background in some of these areas. Moving along, world languages. Okay, this is one that we see a lot. Typically, the baseline requirement is 2 or 3 years of language in one language other than English, and 2 or 3 years sequenced in that language. They really want to see not like a year of Spanish, a year of French, but really 2 to 3 years of one language. For some schools, American Sign Language, ASL will count, some of them don't, so that's some fine print you might want to read. For the highly selective schools, I will say that they would like to see you really max out on the rigor in those languages and really try for fluency. Again, it's about the value of being able to communicate with people from other cultures, being curious and interested in other cultures as well. And so the language requirement is not just about learning a language, but it's a signal about something, a broader curiosity and some broader values that you might have. Again, read the fine print. And then the other thing I will say is that students sometimes take 2 years of high school language, and then they don't take language for a while. And there are some colleges out there that require language study. And so then you get to college and you have to decide like, oh, am I going to continue that language that I haven't studied for a while? Or am I going to start a new language? You know, it's just something, again, as you're looking at colleges that you might think about. All right, arts music requirement. The University of California system is very specific that they want 1 year of visual and performing arts. And high schools really vary across the country, but the UC has that specific requirement. So if you think the California schools in particular are going to be on your list, I would really encourage you to think about that 1 year a fine arts credit. And again, look at the fine print from other schools. Students can fulfill this in a lot of different ways, and they're great courses. So just, explore a little bit. Electives. Electives are a great chance to just explore some things that are not part of the core, not part of requirements, but really just a way for you to open up and try something maybe you haven't done before. Popular electives in high schools tend to be around, I think, engineering, business, computer programming. Sometimes computer science is considered an elective. Sometimes it fulfills a math or science requirement. I've even seen a high school that has computer science as fulfilling the language requirement. So again, read the fine print for your school on that one. But these are great classes, again, to just show your interest, to explore. There's nothing, there's no consequence, I guess, for really just trying to explore. And it can also signal to a college like, hey, I'm really interested in business, or I've tried this and, this is what it taught me. So you can write about that in some of your essays. And that's what we love about some of the electives. Again, your school might have, some different choices. So you'll want to look carefully at what those are. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Allie for a little bit more about course choices.
And Anita pointed to a couple of things actually that you're gonna see again that are gonna show up a little bit in our case studies. A couple of examples there that she spoke about a little bit, and so excited to dive in a little bit more. So when you think about decision making, this framework jumps a little ahead to kind of focus more on that college prep model. It makes this visual kind of makes an assumption that students are going to get those baseline requirements in. And for many students, that will be going above those minimum requirements for graduation from high school to prepare for college and to explore before college. So of course, that sweet spot and the most ideal course schedule for you is where those things can intersect. So the first factor here, rigor of coursework and preparation in various subjects. Think about what options are available to you to prepare you to succeed in that next step. And how prepared are you to take a more advanced class, let's say in any given subject? Second, what are colleges expecting for you to be competitive in their applicant pool and prepared for the rigor of their program? Don't forget, both Anita and Hanifa spoke a little bit to that high school story that your transcript tells and that holistic piece. So definitely we're gonna probably say it multiple times again and again, but colleges will consider all of those contextual pieces that go into your academic high school story and your course choices. And finally, in the third circle here, what are you interested in and excited to learn about? What classes are going to help you build upon prior coursework to get where you might want to land in the future potentially? And what academic skills have you built and how does that show up in your grade performance too? If you have multiple interests or if you don't know yet what your interests are, that's all great too. So considering these three factors, how to prioritize when making these decisions and thinking about those future implications of those decisions too. So ideally, there's a lot of overlap between these areas for you and the choices may become more clear and easier because of that. And we also know that every school has different policies and different course offerings. So this decision-making process and prioritization will look different for every student. Make sure to ask yourself, what is the best rigor for you? Not for your best friend, not for your teammate or your older sibling. Just because they took XYZ classes doesn't mean that that's going to work well for you. And remember how those three factors overlap within your school context, how to set you up for best learning outcomes and for you to enjoy school too. And then we're going to move into case studies here in a second. I just want to emphasize again that admissions officers review students' course schedules within the context of what's offered at their school. So I know you've heard that multiple times. Once again, we may say it a couple more times just to hit that home. A student might not have many choices of various levels, programs, or electives, and that's going to be apparent to the application reader. So just keep that in mind for our case studies. So first, we're going to do an early in high school case study. And we're going to talk about our friend Jack. So for this case, we're going to kind of focus on Jack's interest area. Remember those three factors, those three bubbles, as well as those college expectations piece. These two things are going to kind of drive some early in high school decisions for Jack. He is lucky to have identified a strong interest early on. By the way, his interest is computer science. And I want to note that that's not necessarily normal for an incoming high schooler. So keep that in mind. This is just Jack's story. He also has high aspirations of selective or highly selective colleges. And given his interest of computer science, knowing that that may be what he wants to major in once he gets to college, computer sciences can sometimes be a particularly selective or competitive major to get into as well. So we're going to use those prioritized to help decide what to take in ninth grade. So his school also offers some honors and AP level classes. He has access to those if he performs well enough to get teacher's approval. So what decision are we making here? What's the problem that we're trying to solve again? Coming from his middle school, he's not currently on track to take calculus. I know you all remember this from when Anita was talking about calculus decision. And we have a couple things we want to prioritize for him. A, fitting in some computer science electives throughout high school, and B, taking an advanced math course like AP Calculus, for example, by senior year, by the time he graduates. And remember that Venn diagram on that decision-making process. For Jack, kind of those two priorities are coming into play, his interest areas and then those college expectations. So it'd be good for him to fold in some computer science electives throughout the 4 years into his schedule, and then try to prioritize taking an upper level math course by the time he graduates. And so what Jack had to do here was he actually decided to kind of double up in ninth grade. And he did that by actually taking a summer course. So after ninth grade, he was able to take geometry here, as you can see. And that put him kind of back on track from his transition from middle school into high school in order to be able to take those prerequisite math courses that he needed to get to that level of math by 12th grade. So it's also good to note that he is taking the honors level of a couple other subjects in ninth grade, English and world language, you can see at the honors level. And that kind of sets him up to have a little bit more options in his schedule later on throughout his 10th through 12th grade, at least in those subject areas to potentially take an advanced course in those areas as well. Remember, he was interested in potentially applying to some selective programs or selective colleges later on down the line. So that does kind of keep his options open. And then you'll see on the far right side, those total number of credits. I just wanted to highlight there that he actually ended up with an additional math credit. So he ended up taking 5 credits or 5 years of math, going kind of above and beyond that 4 minimum requirement. That wasn't necessarily the goal for Jack. The goal for Jack was to potentially be able to take calculus. But he did end up taking that extra year of math. So that kind of ended up in a bonus. And then he was also set up for success taking Intro to Computer Programming in 9th grade to be able to take an upper level computer science elective by the time he graduated as well. So you can see there that he ended up taking AP Computer Science in 12th grade as well. So that's Jack's story. We're going to move on to Mindy, who is a rising 11th grader. So the big picture here for Mindy, really transitioning from 10th to 11th grade for some students. So Mindy in particular was trying to decide whether to take a full schedule of IB courses, otherwise known as IB Diploma Program, stands for International Baccalaureate Program, courses for both junior and senior year, or to not go that route and have the option of taking AP or honors level for junior and senior year. Both are considered the most advanced rigor offered. And so in a case where a school offers both for students, sometimes this can be a really tough decision. And so this was kind of what Mindy was really grappling with. It's worth noticing, and I plotted in some grades there. You can see that with a mix of A's and B's in her 9th and 10th grade year, and having taken 1 honors class in 9th grade, and then 3 honors and 1 AP in 10th grade, Mindy was really ready and had a solid foundation to take on a challenge come junior year. However, Mindy was especially hesitant and worried for math, math not being her strongest area or her favorite area. So that was kind of something that came into play when she was making this decision. It's important that Mindy talked to her teachers and school counselor to get that input before making her final decision. What was better for her? Doing the full IB program meant that all of the subject areas were going to be at the advanced level and rigorous, rather than her other option. She could kind of pick and choose which subjects she'd take at that advanced level. Her interests included science, art, public policy, and design. And so ultimately taking the AP route would have actually given her more flexibility to follow those interests. And taking the IB route would allow her to actually go deeper into the subjects that she thought she was more interested in at the time. So as an example, you can see in her 11th grade schedule, the IB curriculum included global politics, as well as visual arts. And you can actually take visual arts junior and senior year in the IB program. And that was really interesting to her. And this might have differed from the topics that were potentially offered at the AP level at her school. You can see that she chose the IB route in the end. And then also we can predict that her senior year schedule will look very similar. Since she opted for that full IB diploma program, she'll take 7 IB classes again in senior year. And that's ultimately what Mindy ended up deciding. That is Mindy's story. And I'm actually going to kick it back over to Hanifa to talk about next steps before we have questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. So we've definitely thrown a lot of information at you here, a lot of things to consider as you make your own choices. And so we just wanted to highlight again some important next steps for you in order to apply this knowledge to your own specific context and specific choices. It's really crucial that you work with your school counselor. Your school counselor is your resident expert of your school, right? So if you're thinking about your course options, about what's required in order to take certain courses, this is the person that you want to work with. Also, this is also someone who will be very important for your college application process as well. So starting that relationship at any stage is really important. And by the way, just note that all of these steps are really great ways to start practicing those skills that we talked about that will help you to transition successfully to doing college academics. The other thing is to know your resources and use them. Read your student handbook if you have one. Read your curriculum requirements. You can find them online typically. If you can't find them, again, ask your school counselor where to get this information. And also pay attention to when your high school is offering info sessions and attend them. This is something that as an academic advisor in college, I was constantly saying to students, read your handbook, read your handbook. Everything's there often, and it will help you to be well prepared for your choices. Start with your required classes and then build around it. This will help you to kind of reduce the sense that there's so many options. Where do I start? Once you plug in the things that you don't have a choice about, it helps to narrow down the field a bit. And then also look up those college requirements. If you don't know your whole list, that's okay. Start with a school that you might be interested in. Start with your dream school. Start with a school that you know you're going to apply to that's nearby. It can help to start to give you a sense of what colleges are looking for, and you can factor those into your considerations. The other thing is don't forget about yourself. Don't forget to consider what would you like to learn more about? What do you want? What skills do you want to develop? What do you want to be prepared for when you graduate, when you're making your choices? And finally, be confident about your choices. We're talking about ways for you to maximize your options, to really stand out. But ultimately, the choices that you make, as long as you're meeting these requirements and you're doing your best, you'll be able to use them to have a successful college admissions process. Don't focus on what others are doing. How admissions officers read your application will depend on all the other aspects of your application as well. And so there's an individual aspect of that in the way that they review your applications. And also don't second guess yourself once you do it. Just keep moving forward, keep making the best choices that you can make at each step. It'll work out for you. And I'll kick it back to Meredith at this point.
Well, you all were keeping us busy in the Q&A for sure. And hopefully everybody was really paying attention to all of the information that Hanifa and Anita and Ali were sharing. Again, this is being recorded. You will get a copy of the recording so you can go back and listen to it again at your leisure. But before we jump into that, I did promise that folks would have the chance to raise your hands to possibly work with a Collegewise counselor or to get more information. You can see that all of us are very passionate about the work that we do. And so there's a poll that's appearing on the screen right now. If you're interested in potentially working with one of us or in working with one of our colleagues or just in getting more information, just go ahead and click that button that's on there, and one of our program advisors will reach out to you in the coming days to set some time up with you to talk to you about what it might look like for you to work with one of us or to work with one of our colleagues or just to get more information for you. And for those of you who are saying that doesn't seem like the right time, that's okay. You can always reach out to us later, especially for those of you who are in 9th and 10th grade. If you decide later on, actually, maybe we can use some help, you know where to find us. You'll have our information in your inbox, and hopefully you've grabbed some of the links of some of the free stuff that we've been putting in the chat tonight. So we did have a couple of different questions we want to try to answer live. You guys really did throw a lot of fantastic questions in there. So one of the questions that came up was around encouraging whether or not a parent should encourage their student to take exploratory electives like art classes to show broader interests. This particular student is in all honors or AP courses that are weighted, and she's concerned that an elective would just pull her GPA down as that class wouldn't be weighted. So we're going to talk about this specifically, and then we're going to talk about GPA right after that, but sort of the broad, like the choosing electives piece first.
I guess I'll start. I'll say that I encourage students to take whatever they're excited about, whatever they're interested in, because they'll do well in that area. And it's a nice way to sometimes bring some balance to a really hard schedule. Because if you enjoy art and, it's sometimes balances out like the hours a night you're, maybe stressing out about a different class that it just feels more challenging. So I would say it's not necessarily, going back to your point, Meredith, about GPA, it's not really about the GPA. College is just going to look at the whole transcript and say, oh, these are the classes the student took. And, oh, I see the student really loves art and has taken multiple art classes. Or maybe it shows up somewhere in that essay that they're writing for the college about why they took art classes and how that might there's a really interesting connection between bio and art. They're both very, very visual, very process oriented. So I've had students write about their love of both bio and art. And, that makes for a great application to really connect the dots for an admissions officer. So again, it's not about the GPA, it's really about the broader picture and that story that you're trying to tell. I love when students dive into an interest. And it might be that, a student says, well, I'm dabbling in art now. I might not have time to take it in college. So yeah, please take it now. At least that's my sense. Hanifa, Ali, anything you want to add?
Sounds like we got that one tackled pretty well. I'm seeing thumbs up all around from this. So I do want to talk a little bit sort of about the GPA question, because there were a lot of different questions in here about GPA. How do colleges look at it? The weighted versus unweighted question. Do colleges look at your school like individually or you individually within your school? Examples of my school requires me to take an unweighted class for graduation, which pulls down my GPA. All those kinds of things. I know, hopefully Ashley or Renee, one of you can throw the blog post on what's a weighted versus an unweighted GPA into the chat. That would be helpful. But can you talk a little bit about like how admissions officers view GPA, sort of what the context is around that when it comes to reviewing applications?
That's really going to depend on where you're applying, unfortunately, but just because I think every college and university is gonna look a little bit differently at GPA. I mean, there's so many different versions. A lot of the time you can even get an idea of this just by looking at the different GPAs that are showing up potentially on the transcript. There's everything from, sometimes you're looking at 9th through 12th grade or 9th through 11th grade. Sometimes you're just looking at 10th through 12th grade, an academic GPA versus the entire thing. And so, Meredith, you definitely kind of hinted at this here, but really colleges and universities are going to be evaluating the grades that you got and mostly focused on looking at those academic core subjects and taking into account the rigor of those, depending on if there are different rigor levels offered at your high school and weighted versus unweighted. So like the different numbers don't necessarily mean all that much. To be honest, they mean more actually in your high school context than they do when you're thinking about in that college context or that college application context. They don't mean as much because application reviewers are trained to look at, I mean, there are thousands of high schools in just the US. That's not even including international applications that are coming in from all over the world. And so really we're just looking at the grades within the grades as a whole. So once again, A's, B's, C's, looking at those different grades and potentially recalculating a GPA for that specific college and university's evaluation process. So hopefully that helps paint a little bit of a broader picture. And Hanifa, I don't know if you have anything to add, or Anita.
I think to me, one of the points that I was trying to make with my students is, it's not just about the GPA number, because you can get to that GPA number so many different ways. And I know I did a campus visit at Purdue not too long ago. And granted, I used to work there, so I was sort of going back and visiting and getting refreshed. But in their admissions presentation, they were specifically talking about, it's not the GPA number they were looking at, it's the courses you've taken and the grades you've earned. Like that was the piece. And I think that sort of goes back to what you were saying earlier, Hanifa, about the transcript as well. Like, what's the story the transcript tells? It's not just about what that single GPA number is. We also got a ton of questions around science courses for non-STEM students. I mean, I know we sort of hammered pretty well on the science courses and the math courses for STEM students, but for students who really aren't necessarily interested in majoring in STEM and are pretty sure they're not, or for students who aren't necessarily interested in targeting highly selective colleges. What's your broad advice around which STEM classes to focus on, target, again, broadly speaking?
Sure. I will say that I think those, the mainstays of the geometry, algebra, trigonometry, and then the biochem and physics are pretty important. But other than that, I would say to a student, take what you're most excited about. I mean, I know AP Environmental Science is a particularly popular class right now, as so many young people are talking about climate change and how that affects them. And it's not just a science class, right? But it is something that carries over to other subjects as well. It's much more interdisciplinary in nature. So I would say take the classes that are most exciting to you. I will also say, though, that if you are undecided, I would say continue on with the math and science as long as you are undecided. And the reason I say that is because if you go down the math and science path and you say, oh, nope, really don't want to be a physics major, you can jump out of that. You can major in anything else. But if you go along that like non-science or math path and then decide, oh, I really did love biology, I really want to, study biology again, it's really hard to jump back into science, only because the way those classes are stacked and sequenced and the way that the knowledge builds on one another, it can be kind of tricky. But to a student who says, you know what, no, I'm not going to do STEM, that is really not my calling, that is not my future, I would say, fill up on those other things that you are excited about, and especially if you're saying you're not interested in a highly selective college, then certainly take lots more electives if you can and take the interesting classes. Maybe there's something offered locally too at your community college that sounds great. Definitely go for it.
Oh, go ahead, Hanifa.
Yeah, I would just add that this goes back to the bigger picture, right? What narrative are you giving the schools about who you are and what you're actually trying to do? So beyond, right, taking care of your basic requirements, what do you want to position yourself for? What potential pivots might there be? Right, which is kind of what Anita was referring to. If there's a possibility you may move from I don't know, sociology to environmental science, and maybe you should position yourself to be able to kind of straddle those things. And then also one of the things that you do want to consider, just and from a purely strategic perspective, is are these courses, so you're choosing, say you're deciding to continue taking sciences all the way through the 4 years just to be able to have done it, and then you're choosing between taking AP in this course as opposed to taking a standard course. And if it's something that you don't enjoy, and that also in taking it, you may really damage your academic performance and you don't have a story around that, right? You don't have something to say, well, I just did it because I loved it and I wanted to risk everything, because that's a story that some people tell sometimes, like I'm really bad at it, but I just love to do it. And sometimes people have had success with that story. But if you're just taking it because you think you have to, sometimes you can make the choice not to take the most rigorous version of that and instead show your rigor in other ways and in other areas. So there's really not a one size fits all kind of answer to that kind of decision making, if that makes sense.
Absolutely does. And that actually, we have time for one more question. And Hanifa, that is the perfect setup for the last question. This one came up, I think, at least 5 times in the Q&A. So we're going to go with the big picture. Is it better to take an easier class and get an A, or a harder class and get a B? Or what if you might risk getting a C in that class? I know this question comes up a lot with my students when I'm helping them sort of sort through what's going to be the best option for them with the upcoming year. And it is possible to overshoot, but you also don't want to sort of lowball yourself. So what would you say to a student who's trying to figure out an A in the easier class or a B in a harder class, or maybe risking a C if it's a real big stretch?
It goes back to prioritizing those different factors that we went over, those different decision-making factors. I think it is really important to weigh it all out, and kind of look at it from all the different angles, especially when you're making decisions, I think, earlier on in high school. Remember that those decisions can impact what you're able to take or what you potentially could take later on in high school. So I do think it makes sense to definitely think it through and talk to your teachers, talk to your counselor, use your resources, and really consider all of those different factors. And you have to determine kind of what's the priority for you, maybe for that specific class or for that specific subject, and consider those big picture things. And Anita, I'm going to give you the last word here because I saw you come off mute. And so perhaps you have one more thing to say.
So again, I don't think it's about the grade. I almost always counsel students to take the harder class first. So if you're just deciding between honors, AP, and regular, start off on the harder class. And, in the first 2 or 3 weeks, if you're like, oh my God, this is going too fast, this is too hard, I don't understand things, and I'm trying to reach out to the teacher, but it's not working, or whatever it is, you can drop down to the easier, the less rigorous class, whatever you want to call it. But if you start off in the, you start off in regular math, and then the first 2 weeks you're like, oh my God, I know everything. This is so boring. This is going too slow. You can't jump into the honors class. At that point, it's like too late. So, just from a strategic angle, I always tell students, start with a harder one, see how those first 2 or 3 weeks go, and be real honest with yourself and switch it if it doesn't make sense. The other thing is that there's a lot of great resources out there. So use your resources, talk to your teachers. If you're not feeling well, about a class, maybe there's something that else can happen. And I will say, from the highly selective college perspective, they will say, you know, is it better to get a B in AP class or get an A in a regular class? And they will say, get an A in the AP or honors class. And that is their kind of, it's a weird little line, but they have used it. But again, at the end of the day, you got to do what's best for you, and you have to think about your other classes too. So like, you know, maybe you want to be a math science major and you want to, you know, really focus on those classes. Maybe it doesn't make sense to do the honors English class because that's maybe not your priority. So, you know, some of those little pieces can make a big difference. And again, when we counsel students, we're really counseling them in a very holistic way. We're really looking at, you know, their 4-year plan, thinking about college, thinking about their state and school requirements, and like putting it all together and thinking about their, you know, their own traits and what motivates them, because maybe you're more motivated for a certain type of class than another. And those are all important factors.
And with that, we are officially out of time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Ali, Hanifa, Anita, for presenting. Thank you, Ashley and Renee, for being in the chat box and then the Q&A. And thanks everyone for joining. Watch your email for the recording of the webinar in the next couple of days. And for those of you who raised your hand to get more information about Collegewise, someone will be in touch very soon. And for those of you who didn't, take a look at our free resources because there's still a lot of good stuff out there. So thanks again. Have a great evening and hope to see you at another webinar soon.